Okay, so let's talk about one of the biggest ideas in medicine right now, a digital twin that actually learns. But, and this is the important part, we're also going to look at why, after a solid decade of hype, this amazing concept just isn't living up to its promise. And I mean, I want you to really try and picture this. Imagine a perfect one-to-one virtual copy of a patient's tumor. It's just living inside a computer. It's got the same genetics, the same structure, all the same weaknesses. So what if doctors could test thousands of drug combinations on this digital clone to find the absolute perfect treatment for that one specific patient? And they could do all of this before a single dose ever touches their body. Think about that. No side effects, no risky trial and error happening inside a real person. This, right here, is the promise of the medical digital twin. This is the vision that has researchers and doctors so incredibly excited. It's a total game changer for personalized medicine, especially in a field as tough as oncology. But, despite all that hype and all that obvious potential, when you actually dig into the last decade of research, well, it shows a pretty huge gap between what's being promised and what's actually being delivered. And this is where things get really interesting, because the reason why it's falling short, well, it's not what you'd think. It's not about a lack of computing power, it's not a shortage of data. The problem is much deeper. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what a cancer digital twin is even supposed to be. All right, so let's actually dig into that disconnect. Let's look at the hard evidence. How do we know the practice just isn't living up to the promise? So a recent review took a look at the last decade of cancer research and found 168 studies that all use the term digital twin. I mean, that sounds like a lot of activity, right? Well, hold on. When the researchers applied a really strict definition, looking for systems that are actually dynamic, that learn over time, and are truly connected to the patient, that number plummeted. They found only about 29 that even came close to being what you'd call a real digital twin. And here's where it gets even crazier. You see, modern cancer treatment is all about omics data, genomics, proteomics, that sort of thing. It's literally the biological blueprint of the tumor. And yet, roughly 70% of these so-called digital twins aren't even using it. It's like trying to build a perfect replica of a house without ever looking at the blueprints. So what is this core misunderstanding? Well, it turns out we've been borrowing this whole concept from the wrong field entirely. You see, the whole idea of a digital twin comes from engineering. Think about something like a jet engine. It's got thousands of sensors feeding it a constant stream of data second by second. That lets you make these tiny, continuous adjustments to keep it stable. That's what you call a control system. But cancer is a whole different beast. We don't get a constant stream of data. We get sparse observations, a biopsy here, an MRI a few weeks later. And the system doesn't just drift. It changes dramatically when we hit it with a treatment like chemo. Here's a great way to think about it. We've basically been trying to use a thermostat's logic. A thermostat is designed to keep things stable, right? It makes small adjustments to maintain a set temperature. But a tumor isn't a stable room. It's a complex, evolving ecosystem. You don't really learn about it by just watching it sit there. You learn about it by poking it, by seeing how it reacts when you hit it with a treatment. Okay, so once you grasp that, it leads to a complete paradigm shift. The goal isn't just to build a better, more accurate model. It's about building a better learning system. And that's the absolute heart of the matter. A cancer digital twin isn't a control system. It's what the paper calls a perturbation-driven learning system. In other words, we have to stop thinking of it as a static photo and start seeing it as a dynamic system designed specifically to learn every time we intervene. And this is what that new system actually looks like. It's not a one-way street where we just build a model and ask it questions. No, it's a closed loop. It's a cycle of constant learning and getting better. Let's break down exactly how that cycle works. Okay, it's a 4-step process. First, the model makes a prediction about how the tumor will respond to a treatment. Step 2, the patient actually gets that treatment. That's the perturbation. Step 3, the doctors compare the model's prediction to what actually happened in the real world. And here's the magic. Step 4, the difference between the prediction and reality is fed back into the model to make it smarter. The system literally learns from its mistakes. There's a quote from the research that just nails this idea perfectly. It says, "The challenge is not to build a digital twin. It is to design a system that can become one." We don't need a perfect model right out of the gate. We need a system that has the built-in capacity to learn and evolve into a true twin over time. Okay, so this all sounds fantastic in theory, right? But how do you actually start building something like this? Well, the key is you don't try to build the entire super complex system all at once. Instead, you start with something called a minimum viable digital twin, or MVDT. And those words are really important, minimum and viable. The question becomes, what's the absolute simplest model we can build that's still biologically useful, and most importantly, something we can actually test and validate today? And there are a few different ways to build that initial foundation. You could start with what's called a cell state model, which just looks at how different groups of cells interact. Or you could use a mechanistic model that tries to map out the key biological pathways. Or you could go with a data-driven machine learning model that's just looking for patterns. But the real power, down the line, is in combining these different approaches into a hybrid twin. This roadmap really shows you the whole journey. See, you start at the bottom with that simple, testable, minimum viable digital twin. Then, using that learning loop we talked about, it gets better and better with each treatment. It basically climbs this validation pyramid, going from just matching the basic biology to having some real predictive power all the way up until it's a truly valuable clinical tool. All right, so let's wrap this all up. Why does this big shift in thinking really matter so much? Okay, here are the key things to remember. First, digital twins at Oncology are seriously underperforming right now. Second, the problem isn't the tech, it's our whole concept of what they are. So we have to shift from just building models to designing learning systems. The goal is to squeeze every last drop of information out of treatments, turning them into learning opportunities. And the way to do it is to start with a simple, testable MVDT and let it grow from there. And that leaves us with a much bigger, more exciting question, doesn't it? This whole idea of perturbation-driven learning, it goes way beyond just cancer. It's really a new way of thinking about the scientific process itself. It really makes you wonder, what other breakthroughs are just sitting there, waiting for us, if we start designing our scientific tools, not just to measure the world, but to actively learn from it?